So this is my backyard. Got a couple inches of snow on the ground. Not a whole lot, but it's an absolutely gorgeous day. Not a cloud in sight. It's absolutely beautiful. Right now, it's probably, I would guess, 38 degrees, maybe cooler than that. But it's supposed to get down into the low 20s, high teens tonight. So I think this is perfect weather for me to test out my cold weather sleeping bag. So in preparation for tonight's experiment, I wanted to do some of my setup now while it's still plenty light out and I can get good video of it. I won't be moving into my temporary abode probably until 8 o'clock or so, which is around the time I would normally go to bed, especially if I'm out hiking and during the winter. It gets dark pretty early here in New England. So what I'm going to do is go over my equipment first so that you know what I'm working with, and then I'll set up the camera to take some time lapse. So first item I've got here, this is my hammock system. It's not ultralight, it's nothing even close to ultralight. It's a 9x11 blue tarp from Harbor Freight, a maybe $20 hammock from Amazon, and a military issued insect net that I won't be using. I keep it all rolled up and strapped together with a inexpensive sleeping bag strap that I bought at the Base Exchange. So none of this is exactly high-tech gear. So there's my tarp. G for Free is the brand name on my sleeping bag that I have used before, but never in conditions like this. And like I said, a military insect net that I won't be using. I've got a hank of about, I guess, 70 feet of paracord. And then the main focus of this experiment is my sleeping bag. Now this is supposedly, according to what our supply sergeant told me when he issued it to me, rated for 20 below zero. I've never gotten cold in it yet, but I've also never really pushed it to the limit. So it's a 3-part system. You've got the main sleeping bag, which is the green part. You've got the cold weather insert, which is the black part. And then the really cool piece is this Gore-Tex shell. Now the Gore-Tex shell will keep it from getting wet, but will allow some of the wet from inside, like me if I sweat, or condensation to escape. From what I've heard, it probably won't let a whole lot of the condensation escape, but some of it will. All right, so let's set some stuff up, huh? Of course, it helps if I remember to bring out the tent stakes to stake down my cover tarp. I'll be back. So there it is. Nice simple shelter that is very low to the hammock. The reason I made it low to the hammock is to try and hold as much heat in as possible. With temperatures in the upper teens, I don't expect it to do much. But what did I do wrong? Well, first of all, I was a little short on cordage, so I only put in corner stakes. I did not put a stake in the middle. That would give it a little more room. I had my sleeping bag inside out. They wouldn't snap together properly when I tried to put the sleeping bag into the liner. And then having to lay it out on the snow in order to get everything would make your sleeping bag cold. So when you first get in it, it's going to be cold. But in 20-degree weather, it's going to be cold no matter what. So now let's wait till tonight and see how this works. Okay, so I'm getting ready to head outside and see how warm that sleeping bag really is. I'm wearing a pair of thin slit long johns, a pair of warm winter adventure pants. I don't know the actual brand name. And then just a long sleeve, heavy duck cotton shirt. Yes, I know cotton kills, but the reality is I'm in my backyard. I'm 20 feet from my back door. I can get in before I freeze to death, should that happen. My hope is that I won't need any of that and that I'll be too warm and shedding layers inside my sleeping bag. Hopefully the knots will hold so that my hammock doesn't drop me on the ground. Wish me luck. Okay, so here we go. I hung a thermometer out here earlier. Let's see how cold it is. According to the thermometer, it's as expected. Let's see if I can make this visible. I don't know if you can read that. I show about 22 degrees. So it's good and chilly. And the fun part of this will be trying to get in the hammock. As you can see, not a whole lot of room in here. Not a lot of tension on these lines either. If I were actually out in the wilderness, I would want these middle lines to be tied out as well to keep it taut. But because I'm in a situation where the actual risk is pretty insignificant, that's not a big deal. So I've got me a pair of gloves here. The wife insisted that I bring gloves. But the hard part is going to be getting in the hammock. This is my first time hammock camping. So this will be fun. Okay, well, I got in my hammock. Took a little doing. Took, to be honest, effort worthy of a professional contortionist. Getting into this mummy sleeping bag and the hammock at the same time was no easy feat, but I managed to get it done. Right now the hammock is not, rather the sleeping bag's not zipped up, and where my arms are pressing against the hammock and not the sleeping bag, my arms are already getting a little chilled. But my torso that's in the sleeping bag is very warm. and my back, where it's pressing against the sleeping bag, is also warm. Now, full disclosure, the sleeping bag itself, I did not leave out here since I set up this setup. I went ahead and I took it inside so that it wouldn't be cold getting into it. Because the reality is, my body would warm it up, but it would be unpleasant. And why make it more unpleasant than it needs to be? Now, one problem that I already see is this tarp, which this is not a camping tarp. This is just a cheap blue tarp, and you get what you pay for. So I think that if I'm going to do actual hammock camping in the Whites, that a proper tarp is definitely pretty high on the list. I might want to consider switching from a sleeping bag, and this sleeping bag literally weighs 4 times as much as a good backpacking sleeping bag, to a quilt and an underquilt. The problem with quilting for sleeping bags is when you lay on it, you compress the insulation, reducing its insulation capability. An underquilt hangs underneath the hammock, so it doesn't get compressed the way that a regular sleeping bag will, and so it'll keep you warm on the bottom as well as the top. And then the quilt goes over the top to keep you warm. So it's an interesting concept that I haven't done anything with, so I look forward to learning about it. So after adjusting things around a little bit, I'm pretty comfortable. Still got to zip up the sleeping bag, but so far I haven't lost hardly any warmth. I've only been out here about 10 minutes though, so we'll see. But I'm a night reader. In order to get to sleep, I got to do a little reading. Got me my Kindle here, and of course, when I'm done, I'll make sure to tuck it inside the sleeping bag. Extreme cold is not good for electronics, and same with the phone, which will make finding it first thing in the morning as I'm stumbling out of my sleeping bag half awake kind of an entertaining and challenging venture. I don't know if you can see it, but I can see my breath inside my tent. I hear a little bit of wind out there, so the shelter that the tarp provides, as scant as it is probably actually pretty effective. So, well, good night, y'all, and see you in the morning. Hopefully nice and toasty. So in the end, I think I'm going to call this a failed experiment. After about an hour, it's not the sleeping bag. The sleeping bag has been keeping me fairly warm, though my back is a little on the cool side. I like to sleep nice and toasty. It's the hammock. So I am sliding down and my feet are being pinched together, and when I move around a little bit, my feet come out of the pocket, and then it feels like I'm about to get tossed out of the hammock. So I think if I'm going to do hammock camping, and I definitely think that it's probably the most comfortable I'll be out in the woods, I'm going to need a better hammock. And as long as I'm getting a better hammock, I'll probably want to get a lighter sleeping bag set, or a top quilt and an under quilt. I think that'll be the most comfortable. And of course, this cheap plastic tarp definitely has to go. So I'm going to skedaddle myself back in the house, which will make my wife very happy, and chalk this one up to experiment. Rather, chalk it up to experience. So last night was kind of a mixed result for my test with my hammock. The good news is that the sleeping bag was warm enough. My back was a little bit cold, but overall, I could have survived the night easily and probably gotten some sleep. The problem was I kept sliding down toward my feet all night, and I kept having to wiggle my way back up. And I was afraid that if I actually fell asleep and started sliding down, that my feet would actually slide out of the hammock, because several times they popped out of the gathered section, and so I was heading toward falling out of the hammock. So I think I have a solution for both of those issues. I did a little research early this morning and found out that I had my head in the wrong side. Your head should be on the low end and not the high end, which, looking at it, kind of makes sense now, because of course your upper body is going to weigh more than your lower body, and so if you put that up high, it's going to try and go down toward the low point. Whereas if you do it the other way around, your feet are going to be kind of on the high point. I'm not real thrilled with the idea of sleeping with my feet uphill, but I think it might be worth giving it a shot. Additionally, the cold on my back, I think, can be solved with this. It's just a simple camp pad. I'm going to put it in the hammock and then put my sleeping bag on top of that. That'll give me just a little bit more insulation, which I think would be enough to actually make me pretty comfortable. So let's check it out. Okay, so that definitely made a difference. I felt a lot more stable with my feet up higher, and the mat also keeps the hammock wider. The one problem, or one of the problems I was having last night, was when I got in it, the hammock closed up around me, making it very hard for me to adjust things, like, oh, I don't know, zipping my sleeping bag. So let's go take a look at it. Actual height that I set it at is a little lower than normal. It's hung at about chin height to me, whereas most people say to hide it or to hang it higher. However, they also say that your trees should be 12 to 15 feet apart, and those are definitely more like, I would guess, 9, because it's just barely longer than the hammock itself, which I think is about 7. At least that's what it feels like. So you can see that the pad itself keeps the hammock open. It did make it much easier to get in. Now you'll notice that I put it in backwards from the natural roll that it's stored in, and the reason for that is that if I laid it down the other way, it would try and roll itself back up, because naturally it's going to try and return to that shape. So looks like it's about 18 degrees out, so it got a little colder than expected, but overall I think this will work. And I think later on today I may go ahead and grab my sleeping bag and get out in it. I'll leave the cameras rolling and leave the tarp off so that you can see, and we'll see how comfortable I feel. Overall, I think that would work. I was not feeling any of the cold that I was feeling on my back last night, and I was a lot more comfortable. So and there we go, all torn down. One thing that I will definitely be doing, the hammock I think I'm gonna keep. The tarp I'm gonna replace, but the straps I'm also gonna replace. It's such a pain tying knots and such. And to be honest, I struggled with that a lot more than I should have. Need to work on my knots. But there are better, lighter strap systems. And to be honest, those straps aren't long enough to actually get me the 12 to 15 feet that are recommended. So, new straps, new tarp, and eventually an underquilt and an overquilt. But until then, my good old Army sleeping bag is going to do the trick for me just fine. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it informative, and maybe it's encouraged you to, if not try hammock camping, but at least try something new, something you hadn't done before. Every day is a chance to learn something new, and a day that you don't learn anything is a day that God gave you and you wasted.